A Senate Republican super PAC literally built a fake local news site and used it to link North Carolina's Roy Cooper to a murder that actually happened in an entirely different state, South Carolina. And the operation is reportedly getting ready to run this exact same play in other races. This is the Daily Pulse for August 27, 2026. Okay, let's dive into this. That hyperlocal disinformation operation in North Carolina was uncovered in a report by Popular Information. And look, at first glance, you might just think, well, that's just dirty local politics, right? Using dark money to fund fake news infrastructure and launder a smear campaign. But it's actually much more significant than that. This is just one small, highly functional gear in a massive, globally interconnected machinery of power. And today's explainer is going to map out exactly how that machine works. We can break this global playbook down into 5 distinct sequential stages. We're going to trace the pipeline from the raw, dark money that funds these operations to the weaponization of information, moving on to the capture of the courts, the quiet rewriting of democratic rules, and ultimately, the criminalization of dissent. Let's start with stage 1, funding the influence machine. Because massive political manipulation doesn't just happen organically. It requires a staggering financial engine to build all that infrastructure. The sheer scale of the capital involved here is absolutely wild. According to a profile in Crisis magazine, conservative legal activist Leonard Leo now controls a $1.6 billion gift from the late Bear side. And the stated purpose? Funding new ideological battlegrounds. That immense, concentrated ideological capital exists right alongside massive corporate war chests. To put it into perspective, Truthout reports that big oil giants ExxonMobil and Chevron saw a combined $26.5 billion net income windfall in just the second quarter, largely driven by geopolitical tensions. This right here is the engine of dark money. And this money takes many forms, crossing all borders and issues. In Florida, CBS News Miami reported that a grand jury found the DeSantis administration misappropriated $10 million in Medicaid settlement funds, money that was actually meant for poor children's health insurance, routing it directly into political committees. Meanwhile, in the corporate realm, Sludge reports that private equity and venture capital executives poured over $1.6 million into a super PAC just to target a lawmaker who pushed to close a tax loophole benefiting their industry. And its reach is totally transnational too. Both The National and The Ferret report that far-right figure Jim Dawson is funneling U.S. donor money to fund extremist, anti-migrant vigilante night patrols over in Scotland. Which brings us to stage 2, weaponizing information. The mechanism here is super direct. The dark money engine we just looked at gets utilized to fund widespread information operations that manipulate public reality. And this isn't just isolated incidents, it's a highly automated global scope of cognitive warfare. France's disinformation watchdog, Viginim, documented covert influencer recruitment manipulating TikTok algorithms during Romania's 2024 election. The Polish government tracked systemic content laundering by Russia and Belarus. Down in Brazil, an academic study mapped out parallel ABIN, which is basically a shadow state-backed espionage and disinformation operation. Meanwhile, Japanese and Sasakawa Peace Foundation researchers are tracking China's cognitive warfare against Taiwan, and the Australian Strategic Policy Institute has documented similar Chinese information operations happening in the Solomon Islands. We see this covert manipulation everywhere we look. An investigation by Hawamik uncovered a hidden network of fake accounts that literally shaped Moroccan public opinion for 4 years. We're seeing climate disinformation blended with Russian-aligned narratives being peddled to both the Vatican and the US Congress, according to VS Square. Desmog flagged a Canadian MP actively spreading climate conspiracies, while Radio Canada reported on Chinese campaigns trying to influence Canada's federal elections. But look, covert action is only half the story. The other half is the overt, brute force capture of the media itself. We're seeing intense media ownership consolidation in India, tracked by Bottas4 Media, and in Uruguay, tracked by Observacom. Meanwhile, the press coalition over in Senegal is having to actively resist government decrees aimed at shutting down non-compliant outlets. Building the infrastructure for all this illusion carries a massive toll. Wired reports that Meta is paying up to $16.7 billion to settle a social media harms case, which is leading to sweeping default time limits and algorithm changes for teens. And there is a real physical toll to this, too. Shockingly, Navarra Media points out that UK data centers actually outpollute ExxonMobil. The digital architecture of this influence machine consumes immense societal and physical resources. Moving on to stage 3, capturing legal systems. Because once disinformation successfully shifts public reality, political actors use that cover to capture the actual referees of democracy, the courts. The crucial point here is how legal guardrails are bypassed or just dismantled entirely. In the US, the Virginia Law Review and the State Court Report have extensively analyzed the Supreme Court's expanding use of emergency shadow dockets. These are rulings made outside the normal, transparent scrutiny of full hearings, and they're increasingly being used to assert emergency jurisdiction over state courts, like in the New York redistricting cases. Globally, according to independent watchdogs, this capture is even more aggressive. Amnesty International has documented smear campaigns and disciplinary proceedings against judges resisting government control in Poland. The CEJL reports arbitrary judicial removals across Central America, and the Africa Center outlines how executives control judicial appointments, using Benin's special tribunal as a prime case study of regime capture. Stage 4 is rewriting democratic rules. See, capturing the courts is not the end goal. It is the necessary precursor to quietly rewriting the rules of the game and privatizing public goods. We see this hitting home locally, like Truthout reporting that the U.S. Supreme Court has temporarily allowed a mail voting restriction to take effect for the 2026 midterms. Or in Tennessee, where Chalkbeat reports the state signed a Memphis school district takeover into law, timed perfectly to dilute the city's last Democratic congressional seat. Globally, this looks like the quiet, hidden privatization of public education deepening inequality across Poland, Spain, and Turkey, as reported by Oko Press, El Diario ES, and Gazette de Devoir. At the same time, ethics rules are bypassed entirely. Byline Times found at least 9 UK reform councillors failed to declare business interests, while also noting UK ministers are quietly being left out of key infrastructure initiatives like plug-in solar announcements, even as Hope Not Hate polling shows British voters remain pretty wary of a reform UK government. This institutional capture often relies on incredibly powerful cultural networks. Cross-border investigations have mapped out transnational evangelical networks, building political alliances all across Latin America. Over in the Philippines, the arrest of religious leader Kibuloy exposed the massive political machinery built specifically to shield his megachurch from accountability. So what actually fuels this structural rewrite? Well, according to philosopher George Yancey in a Truthout interview, in the US, it's driven by a constant underlying cultural backlash against anti-racism. That cultural grievance provides the literal fuel for the structural rewrite. Finally, we reach stage 5, criminalizing dissent. According to the framework mapped by these reports, this is the inevitable conclusion of the playbook, utilizing these newly captured legal institutions to violently enforce against any remaining dissent. The human toll of this mechanism is just devastating. As reported by Truthout, a protester against ICE facilities was recently handed a 50-year sentence. It is an extreme example of prosecutors utilizing terrorism narratives against dissent. That protester stated, "I'm absolutely being imprisoned for a political agenda." Similarly, Truthout reports that the U.S. has designated Palestine Action a terrorist group, which extends counterterrorism tools into a broader McCarthyist-style crackdown on solidarity and left-wing protests. And we can trace the exact pipeline of this enforcement. A joint report by Truthout and Prism reveals how a Brooklyn nonprofit has been sending U.S. police to Israel for years to learn intelligence-gathering tactics. We then see those exact tactics deployed domestically. Truthout notes that new court filings reveal Department of Homeland Security undercover agents tracked the vehicles of anti-ICE protesters in Minnesota and even intercepted their private signal chats, all of which leads directly to the extreme legal sentencing we were just talking about. This systemic enforcement crushes individuals across the board. An Air Force major is facing incredibly rare military charges right now just for publicly criticizing unauthorized military strikes, as reported by Truthout. In the UK, Novara Media highlights rights groups calling to reopen a case where 4 Muslim men were jailed for terrorism based on allegedly planted police evidence. Truthout also reported on the frankly deadly prison conditions happening at Delaney Hall. In scaling this enforcement to the future, the UN and Red Cross are currently calling for strict restrictions on the militarization of AI drones and killer robots. Now, before we wrap up, it's important to note this playbook is not invincible. There are crucial counterexamples where the capture mechanism was defeated. For instance, Truthout reports a major win where the 7th Circuit struck down Indiana's abortion law, which reshapes the national legal landscape. And internationally, we see broader cooperative security shifts pushing back against unilateral authoritarianism, like the Swiss voting on tightening neutrality, or the Free Nations cooperative system and broader trade pacts like the CPTPP, analyzed by the Sasakawa Peace Foundation. So, as we step back and look at this interconnected machine, from dark money and fake local news to captured courts and criminalized dissent, we are left with a pretty vital open question. What would confirm or break this pattern of institutional capture? The source articles for today's explainer are linked in the description below.